Alright, so today we're going to do a complete disassembly of these goggles. I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible because nobody wants to sit there for an hour-long video. So let's go ahead and get started. The reason why I'm doing this is because I've done this before several times. The last time I did it, I had 2 screws missing, and I think I know where they go. So since I got to take it apart anyway, might as well go ahead and get it done and record it. So I'm going to take the strap off, the goggle foam off, and right here you have the top cover, so you've got 2 screw holes right here and right here. So everything in here is Phillips head. It's a number 1 Phillips, so number 2 Phillips isn't going to work. Make sure you have one of these smaller Phillips. This is a machine screw, so what I try to do is I try to put the screws separate. So I'll put machine screws over here. Basically, machine screw means it has finer threads and it's flat on the bottom, so it screws into a metal nut. Alright, so those are out. So at this point now we should be able to take the top cover off and these 2 things right here. So I've got just this little just whatever these things are called, little panel popper, and there's a little spot right in here somewhere. Here we go. See that pop? The top of it just kind of popped right off. There we go. All right. There's that one. And there's that one. All right. And then if I push this forward just a little bit, I should be able to pop up and then pull it out like so. Okay, but don't come yanking any of this stuff out yet because this has the Wi-Fi antenna installed still on it. So let's leave this on. I'm going to undo these 2 connectors right here. This is what your little panel or your front LED connectors are. All right, put those over to the side. Now we've got to do the Wi-Fi one, but we can't get to it without undoing this heat sink. This heat sink may look different than your heat sink, but it all goes on the same way. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 screws in order to take this heat sink off. These are also machine screws, so I'm going to put those over here on the side. And I believe those are the only machine screws left in there. Sometimes if your screwdriver isn't magnetized, they don't want to come out. So just use like a little pair of tweezers and pull them out. Now you're going to end up with a bunch of screws, so I highly recommend using something like one of these little boxes or something that you have that just put all the screws in here. I'm going to put the machine screws over to the side so I don't mix those up. All the rest of the screws I'm just going to put in here. Alright, the heat sink is off, and so I can take it off. Now it's going to be all this gooey stuff underneath it. It's just thermal compound, no big deal. It's not going to hurt anything if it gets on anything. But at this point, if it was time to replace your heat sink, that's all you got to do. Take this off, spread the thermal compound on this thing that comes with the heat sink, and then just screw it back on with those 4 screws. I'm going to go further, however. So the first thing I need to do, get this off, I got to take this antenna connector off. I like to use a plastic piece and just kind of pry up just underneath where the cable comes to the connector, to the UFL. There we go, and then that's off. Now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 antenna connections right here. Same little thing. I'm just going to get the little corner of this thing and try to just very gently pop off each of these antennas. Now I've done this a few times, so it may be a little easier from when you do it the first time. Just be careful, don't rush it. All right, those are off. Just gonna kind of put them off to the side. And now we have, this is the RF board right here. So in order to take it out, there's one screw right here on the top center. And it is also a machine screw. Okay, don't start yanking this out. There's things connected to the bottom of this. So I'm just gonna lift it up with this very carefully. And pull it out. But as you can see underneath here, there's a ribbon cable right here, which is very fragile, and a MIPI cable right here. They both will be held on with tape on the bottom side of it. You can see that they're held on with this black tape. You can just take that tape off, and then we can undo the connections. I'm just going to use some tweezers. Take that piece of tape off. Save the tape, because once you put it back together, you're going to want to use that tape again. It just kind of keeps those cable connections in place. Now that I got that one off, I'm going to flip it over and be really gentle with this, because this ribbon cable, the way it is, it's going to crease and pinch and not be good. I'm going to use this plastic piece and just very gently pry underneath on the cable side, underneath of this brown part of the connector, and it just flips up just like that. All right, so once it's flipped up, you can just take the ribbon cable out of the connector. So now it's a little easier to work on. We've got this piece of tape. And then we've got the MIPI connection right here. Right at the very edges, outside edges, there's little black knobs sticking off. Just a little black plastic piece. Get your spudger, and right underneath it, just kind of pry up a little bit on the corner of each side. Very gently. There we go. Now it's completely out. And now we have the RF board completely out of the goggles. All right, I'm gonna put this aside. I'm gonna put the heat sink, put it aside. If you put the heat sink on top of it, like it was, sort of like this, then you'll save yourself from sticking your hand in that thermal compound. All right, so now what we have is the goggles without the RF board in it. So how do we go deeper from here? Looks like, yeah. So the two screws I were missing from the last time I put this together is right here. Not the metal brass machine screw nut right there, but right next to it there's one and there's two, and those are plastic screws. So that's the ones that I have left. But for the sake of this video, I'm just gonna go ahead and undo the rest of them. You've got several of them. So you've got 1, 2, 3 in this top corner, or each top corner. I'm gonna magnetize this real quick. Get you one of these little magnetizers. Helps out a lot. All right. So we'll get this one out. This one over here in this corner. We've got several more. We're just going to go ahead and undo these since we can see them. There's 1, 2, 3 more across the top. 1, 2, 3. Now generally, I like to separate these into, so all those screws I just took out, I'll put those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'll put all 7 of those in a little group over on the edge of my desk or on your mat or something like that, so that I know all 7 of those go to the top of this before I move on to the next step. But for this, I don't have all that room and whatnot, so I'm just going to put them in there. All right, so that's where we are now. Next thing we need to do is undo the screws on the faceplate right here. And they're underneath, there's I think 3 on each side underneath the Velcro. This Velcro is extremely sticky, so it's a little difficult to get on and off, but you can either poke holes in it or you can just peel it back. It'll go back just fine. 1, 2, and 3 on that side. On this side, I actually like the way that these goggles go together. It does make it a whole lot easier than any of the Fat Shark goggles that I've taken apart to take apart and get to the insides. It is, everything in here is fairly serviceable and replaceable, modular, and you'll see that in a minute, how easy it will be. I don't know if Caddx is going to offer parts, replacement parts, all these different modules that's in here. If they did, that would be really, really cool, because it'd be so much easier to fix ourselves if that's the case. All right, so all of those are off, and then there's one more right here in the center. Okay, those are all off. Now, we've got all of that done, so now we can very gently start to separate the faceplate from the top cover. You can use, I recommend using this thing and try to find the little cracks and just start to very gently pry in some of the places. Let's see, is this a good spot? Yeah, there's a good spot right there in between here. Nice, so that got that piece open. And then I'm just gonna gently pry. Same thing on this side. Right here is a really good spot. Stick the plastic in, it comes off. And now you've got your IR sensor cable right there. Just unplug that. Now your faceplate's off. Put that to the side. The next thing to do are the 2 strap holders right here, these little strap holders. There's 2 screws in each of those. They are labeled right and left. I guess that's just to save with confusion. I don't know if you can put them in backwards or not. I haven't tried that, but there's a little R on this one and a little L on that one. This is why having a magnetized screwdriver is very, very helpful, because these just stick right to it when they come out. All right, those are off. These, when they're new, when you haven't done it before, are a little difficult to get off. But if you just kind of pull in towards the goggles just a little bit, like this, pull in like that and pull out, they'll come off. Pull in just a little bit until it clicks. Sounds like it breaks, but it doesn't. And then pull out. There you go. Now that's done. Okay, now we can work on getting this top cover off. You don't have to remove the antennas for this. It's totally fine the way it is. So the way that we get those top covers off is I'm just gonna kind of put my hands on it like this and kind of spread my thumbs apart to try to break. Yeah, there we go, just like that. Just spread it apart just a little bit on that side. Same thing over here. There we go. Now that's spread apart. All right, so all these antenna cables, ribbon cables, MIPI cables, they're all running through holes. So don't just rip this thing off. Take it off very carefully. If you do the If you do the left side of the goggles first, if you're looking at the goggles this way, if you do the left side, take this antenna connector out, just one of them needs to come out. Make sure the ribbon cable slides out. Then you can get to these a little bit easier. Maybe use some tweezers, grab this MIPI and shove it through that little hole. I'm calling it a MIPI. I mean, I guess that's what it is. I don't really know. That one's done. And then last one is that antenna. And then the very last thing we have is this connector right here that goes to the, this is the button control that goes to the power board down here. So just unplug that from the top. Now, I'll be honest, first time I did this, I have no idea how this cable is ran back through here, because when you put this down, you'll see later when you're putting it together very, very carefully that this meets the top of this, and it's very easy to get this cable pinched into it. So you just have to be careful when we're putting that back together, making sure we don't pinch that cable. But that being said, all of that is removable now. So now you can take that off, put it to the side, and we're almost there. There's a bunch of screws left. So what I'll do next is get this HDMI and this power supply board out of here. So there are 3 little hold down brackets right here, 2 screws in this one. It's really smart to take pictures every single time before you take a group of screws out. When you get to the next step, take a picture in multiple different directions of what you just did. Because you'll always, so many times, go back to that picture and say, oh man, was that cable right here? Was it right there? Was it ran under this? Was it ran under that? Always take pictures as you're taking it apart. Before you take anything off. Any connector, if you're not sure about getting it back together, always take those pictures. All right, those 3, this one, well, really all of them are really easy to lose this little plastic bracket piece down in the goggles. Use some tweezers and just try to pull it out. If not, you can always just shake it and it'll come off. Yep, I'll say. This one's a little hard to get to. All right, there we go. 3 plastic pieces. This one that I just took out, it goes back in a certain way, so be very careful of how to do that. If you look real closely, I don't know if I'll be able to show you this, but on this, one side is flatter than the other side as far as the round screw hole. You'll see on one side it's a little flatter than the other. That flatter side goes towards the boards. The round side goes towards the outside of the goggles. So it goes down just like that. So just make sure when you're putting it back on, that's how you do it. All right, now we're down to the power boards. Again, there are ribbon cables and other kind of cables connected to this, so just be careful taking it off. What you want to do now is you just want to kind of very gently work this thing up, straight up, along with the HDMI board at the same time. You've got connector right here, which I believe this is the audio connector. You can just undo it, and then you've got the MIPI cable or the ribbon cable that goes that carries power to the I guess power, yeah, to the LED board right under here. I'm not going to undo this cable because I don't need to, plus it's glued in. You'll notice some of those other ones were probably glued in as well, but I don't need to take this off. So what you can do, if you want, just undo this connector. It's a whole lot easier. I don't think it's glued in or anything in yours, and that way you have your power supply, SD card reader, all that fun stuff all in one module. So if you have an issue with your power, you can probably just get this replaced. If you have an issue with the SD card, with the controller, any of that stuff, hopefully they'll just have this as a piece. Same thing with the HDMI. This is your HDMI board. It's connected with this ribbon cable that goes to the LED board down here. Right now, I'm just going to kind of leave it in place, and we're going to take this bottom cover off, and that's going to be basically as far as I want to go with it. To get this fan off, we've got 3 screws. This is the main fan, basically it's the fan that creates airflow over the RF board on top. As you can see, the fan sucks in air from these holes right here, and the only place for it to go is up and out this way. And we'll talk about that more when I put this together, but I honestly think that is a major design flaw of how this thing is ducting air over this. And I think a lot of the issues are being caused because of that. All right, so this is gone, or this is out now. It's just those 3 screws. Next, we have the screws on top right here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 screws on top. Again, these are all plastic screws, so they're pointy and they have a coarse thread. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, those 4 are out. Fan's loose, this is loose. So if I should now be able to work this thing out, but the fan connector down here is still connected. So you can just unplug that fan connector for the bottom fan. And now your optical module and LED board are out, and your bottom case is free. Here's the little small fan that's in the very bottom. This sucks in air right above the bridge of your nose and blows it directly up and on the inside of this thing. Actually, does it? No, it's sucking air through and blowing it out the top of your nose. That's what it's doing. That's what it looks like it's doing. I don't remember. Regardless, it's a very, very small fan to be the only thing that's cooling the power supply board, the optical modules, the HDMI board, which gets very hot. Like all of this stuff, these are the hottest components other than the RF, and that is the only thing that's cooling it, and that is not a lot at all. It's a very small fan, and there's no real ducting to pull air directly out of these areas. Right in here, I'm not going to take this apart because these connectors are all glued in place, but you can tell there's no real ductwork whatsoever. There's heat sinks back there, but that air is just sitting on the inside. And I think that is really the only major design flaw of these goggles, is that right there. All right, so at this point you can replace or do whatever it is you were going to do, and then we can go about putting it back together. You can either play this in reverse, or I'm just going to put it back together real quick and kind of give you my thoughts on what I think are the issues with this thing and what I think are good. All right, so putting this back together, we are going to first thing plug in this fan connector back to this little small 2-pin connector right here. This fan connector over here is going to it. Yes, it's draped over this optical module for some reason. Even though this thing moves around, I don't think that's the best way to do it, but that's how it was when I took these goggles apart, so hopefully they never get pinched. And then with the IR connector facing down and out towards the bridge of your nose, we're going to try to put this back in. These 2 pins right here go inside these 2 holes right here. So that's very important. Don't force it together. It should just fit in place once you get those in there correctly. So put one in the hole and put this pin in the hole. Make sure the little tiny red and black fan wires right here, they're not being pinched. And then we should be able to just lightly, very lightly, kind of work it down back into place. Now you can see this coax cable right here, antenna connector, and this are both being pinched right there. So I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. Lift that up. Take that out of the way, and this out of the way. There we go, now it fits better right on top. Same thing over here, make sure nothing's over here. There we go, that just clicked right back in place. Before you go any further, make sure nothing is pinched under here. Make sure your IR connector is loose so that you can plug it in. Make sure your antenna connectors are not being pinched with the plastic. Make sure your HDMI cable's loose. And over here, make sure your fan cables for this thing are loose, moving around. And same thing with this. All that's back in place. This should fit right on top of where these little plastic standoffs are. Should fit directly on top without any movement. If it feels like there's some space in between the module and where these little plastic standoffs are and you're having to force it down, that means something's not sitting right. So take it out, put it back in very, very delicately. All right, so we took the 4 screws out of the top of this and the 3 screws out of the fan. Let's put those back in. When putting plastic screws in, you should always, especially if they've only been in and out once and the threads are still, I guess, delicate, you could say, on the plastic, it's so easy to strip plastic screws out or to cross thread them. The best thing to do is to put it in and spin the screw backwards until you feel it seat down into the thread. So you feel like a little click or something, just like that. I'll do it again. There it goes, it clicked right into it. And as soon as it does that, start screwing back the other way. And it shouldn't be really tough to screw down at that point. Always do that with plastic threads. It's so easy to cross thread them. And it's really not that big a deal if you cross thread it and you're only doing it once. But if you plan to take these goggles apart and back together several times and you cross thread it different every time, eventually the thread's gonna stop working. All right, so I got those 4 on, these 3 on, so that's all good. Now we put this HDMI and power board back in at this point. Now this is very difficult and takes a lot of, I won't say very difficult, this is difficult and takes a lot of patience getting this in here just right. Everything sits down in these little slots. The HDMI board sits in this first slot on the back and forward of the goggles, and the same thing with the power board, sits down in these little slots on the back and forward part of the goggles. So just make sure, I found the easiest way to do this is with, let's see, plug this back in right here. And then we want to plug our audio cable back in. This is the routing this thing is very difficult. I'm not sure exactly what the best way to route it is. I don't remember from the first time, but just make sure it's not being pinched by anything. Make sure it's loose. I'm gonna plug it in there. Oh no, this thing came out. That's all right. So this little piece of this connector, oh, this plastic piece is gone, that's why. It's okay. I'm just gonna put this back in, and I'm going to hold the wire as I push them back in so that The white plastic piece is really just a guide to help line everything up whenever you close the pins together or whenever you make the connection. So I just held the wire and pushed it back in, so it's making a good connection. The plastic piece is just the guide for it. So that's in there. And this is where it takes a little bit of, I hope I do this right, hope. If you look, I think this is how it's supposed to be. If you look where, if you can see this, I don't know if you can see this or not. Right here where this screw hole is on the front part of the goggles, there's a little channel for these two wires to sit into. That's where you want these two wires to sit. But you got to be very careful that they're actually sitting in that channel and push down inside of it, or else you can pinch these wires. I don't know exactly what these do. I think it has something to do with the audio, with the analog audio or video. So if you have issues with that afterwards, most likely it's that right there. All right. So these two boards, getting them to fit in these slots and line up with the holes is kind of difficult. You just kind of have to work with it. HDMI board's in. Now the power board. This one just like right here where this little barrel connector and this plastic standoff, they are like touching. So you almost have to force it in there. When I say force, I mean very gently force it in there in between so that you can see this. This is one of the design flaws. This connector is just smashed up against the front faceplate or the front part of the goggles. And that's one terrible, I think that's a pretty bad routing flaw for this. All they had to do is move that connector where it goes up or something like that, and that could have been avoided. But now I'm having to smash things together in order for it to sit in place just right. All right, that HDMI board just clicked right in place. Same thing with the power board. It's in the front and the back. You can see this flush right here, and it's flush right here in the back. These two top of these boards, the sides of them at the top are flush with each other. All right, now we just need to make sure that that cable I was telling you is sitting in the channel away. Yep, both of them are sitting in the channel. And you can see where this cable, this little board connector cable, is sitting right on those screws. Again, just not a very good design. But if you just kind of gently lay everything flat, then you can get this little piece we were talking about earlier and put it on there. Now remember, the flat edge, which is this edge right here, goes towards the boards. The rounded edge goes out. So I'm just gonna kind of put it lightly right there in place. It's just sitting in place right now. I haven't smashed it down or anything. It's just sitting in place. I'm gonna get a screw and put that right there in it. Go backwards first, lefty-loosey until it clicks in place, and then tighten down very gently. And you'll feel like I'm feeling the board kind of sit down in place with this bracket. All right, do not over tighten these screws. Really, you can just barely tighten them and they're totally fine. Just slightly hand tighten. All right, that's the hardest part. Now let's get this one in here. This is sort of a weird one. So there's this cavity right here where the hole is. That's the top of it. It's not like this that you would think, where you have this little plastic piece sticking up at the top. No, it's the cavity part. You want to stick the screw down into that, like that. Okay, where it's sticking out the bottom. You want to try to use some tweezers or something to just gently put that right over the hole. Use your lefty-loosey first, click in place, and then tighten that down. Very simple. We're good. This is free, this is free, everything's good. Let's do one more screw, or two more screws on this last bracket. All right, with this one has channels as well. Little plastic pieces sticking up on it. You can see those plastic pieces. So those sit in between the boards to try to hold them in place. The L shape of it goes down like that. So this is where you just kind of move it around until it's sitting in between the boards. There we go. Making sure that's sitting in place correctly. I'm gonna do this one. And with these plastic standoffs, it's really easy to over tighten and strip out the screw or break the plastic. So just be real careful not to do that. You definitely don't want to break the plastic. All right, that's on. That's in place, this is in place. Now's a good time to go through and make sure you've got everything. All your cables are loose, nothing's being pinched. This ribbon cable right here is a little strange. It's just kind of sticking up like that. Don't try to force this to go down into that cavity where it seems obviously it should go. The reason why is right here on the bend of this thing is just overlapping the plastic right here. So if you try to force that in, it's gonna be putting a lot of pressure on the outside of this ribbon cable, and eventually that's gonna break. So it just kind of sits on top like that, and you'll see in a minute when I put that other thing, this is just gonna kind of sit down inside this other cavity. So just leave this up like it is for now. All right, next thing we gotta do is get the top cover put back on. Getting all these wires inside these holes is probably one of the most difficult parts, but I figured out if you start with these first, because they're kind of the hardest, so you want to be able to just, especially this MIPI cable, the way it's designed, it's kind of weird to get in that hole. But there's a long hole right there, you can see, and then there's the little hole right there that the UFL goes through. Sometimes using the tweezers makes this a little easier, but just don't go crazy trying to pull it, this MIPI cable especially, don't go crazy trying to pull it through the hole, because you can break it very, very easily. Cables like this really aren't meant to be unplugged and plugged a whole lot. UFLs go along with it. They're really not meant for many cycles. All right, we can just leave that like it is, and then let's get the antenna going through there. Should have probably did the antenna first, but that's okay. The MIPI cable is the hardest, so I wanted to get that done first. All right, so here we go. There we go. Antenna's going through on this side. Antenna's going, two antennas and the MIPI cable are coming through. Before we go any further, this is where we need to plug in the button connector. The top little button connector right into this thing. This is a very delicate wire, 3 wires, so just be real cautious when plugging that in. And then this is what I was saying, just make sure, I think it's supposed to go right over where the screw head is, right there. So just make sure when you're doing that and you're putting this back on flat, we'll do it in a second, make sure that isn't going over the top of this bracket. All right, last thing is we'll put this antenna connector going through over here, and then this ribbon cable will go through the slot right there. All right, gently kind of pull this past the bend, just like that. Make sure the MIPI isn't tangled up with something. There's that. This one should come out pretty good ways. This one not so much. And now we just need to kind of sit the front of it flat or flush, and it should fit in fairly easily. And then before we snap in the back, we just want to be really cautious with this cable right here, making sure it's exactly where we want it to be. It's not being pinched by anything. Again, I don't know how it's actually supposed to be, but as long as it's not being pinched, you're okay. I think we're good there. Yeah. All right, so this will take a little bit of a force to click it into place, but just kind of go around the goggles before you do so and make sure nothing is being held pinched up. This is what I was talking about, that ribbon cable earlier, how it's just kind of humped up right there. That's where it fits inside this little cavity. So just, it's fine in there. All right. That side's clicked. This side is not clicking so easy, so I'm thinking maybe this cable or something. All right, now it's clicked in place. Just gonna kind of make sure this isn't being held up by something. Nope, we're all good, all good. All right, this is loose. These cables are good. All this is good. MIPI cable's there, ready to go. Now, at this point, we can put the head strap brackets back on, left for left. Yeah, you just kind of line up the little grooves, push into place. Line up the grooves, push into place. Done. And then plastic screws, 2 for each bracket. All right, those are now on there. Nice and tight, but not too tight. Left and right. All right, next thing we need to do is get the faceplate on. So the faceplate will go on. Before we do that, we just need to make sure we plug in the IR connector. There's only one way it's supposed to go in, don't force it. The way I usually look, I just look at the pins and see the top where that closer side of the little groove, whatever that little key slot thing is. Line it up with this one. So it's towards the bottom. So the gold pins that you can see, I guess you can see it from both sides, but Just make sure you're getting this in the right way and it's not being, there we go, and you're not putting it in backwards. It should only fit in one way. There we go. It, again, just kind of is loose in there, but just be careful you don't pinch when you put this faceplate back on. This little plastic piece right here, make sure it's not pinching it. So if you look real quick before I put this back on, right now, so what we did by putting this top plate on, there's no way for the air whatsoever from this fan, the big fan blowing all the air, there's no way for it to get back in here in the cavity of the goggles. Basically, it just blows in across the heatsink and then out. This side's already halfway covered up and blows out of this side. So it's literally just right across the heatsink and just up and out. It doesn't go anywhere else inside the goggles, nowhere. There's no other vent or opening for the airflow to go into. So that does, that separates the heat from the top plate up here from the rest of the goggles, but there's no real good ventilation for the rest of the goggles, which also gets hot, especially over here where this HDMI board is. This thing gets super hot. The only fan is this one little fan down here, which doesn't do a whole lot. I mean, the only place that it brings air in is right here through the faceplate. And there's really no other place that it brings air in. It just exhausts it through these little bitty holes down here. So that's not great at all. And you know, it's okay, but there's so much, everything's so compact in there, and behind the LEDs or the OLEDs, there's no real way to get air blowing over it. Yeah, you can suck air out of it, but you're basically just creating negative pressure on the inside of this thing, which is static, which means the air really isn't moving that much inside of it. So if it does heat up, that air, it's not gonna cool off very easily because it's not being replaced very quickly. So that's just not a great design. It just seems like it could have maybe opened up a pocket or opened up a channel over here to get the air to flow back into here. And if anything, you're taking that negative pressure away that this fan's creating and creating positive pressure, which means the air is going to be moving faster through the goggles, which will in turn cool it off. Even if that air is warm coming from this top RF board, it's still better than creating static air on the inside of these goggles on the bottom side, or static pressure, or a negative pressure, I guess. So, I mean, that's kind of my thoughts on the cooling of this thing. It just isn't a great design. The way they put these goggles together with the modular pieces, that's awesome. That makes it so much easier to take apart. I mean, it wasn't that hard to take apart. You saw that. It's just making sure these little cables are routed the right way is the hardest part of the whole thing. So, and that's a plus, all these modular pieces, so that you can easily just replace the things that need to be replaced. But, I mean, you can see, I mean, it just seems like it would have been easy enough to have the air blow out from here and just below this plate. So that's kind of splitting it, right? That way it'll blow plenty of air over the side of these things, over the top and the bottom of this plastic piece that goes in between the optical module and the top plate. So I don't know. It just seems like that would have been an easy way to do it, but they're engineers and they're way smarter than I am, so maybe there's some way they couldn't do it like that. But anyway, we are where we are with that. All right, so let's put the faceplate back on, just making sure I don't pinch the IR cable. Now remember, again, these are moving parts in here. It's probably a good thing. I should have done this earlier, just to make sure everything is moving and focusing like it's supposed to before you start buttoning everything up. Making sure that fan cable's not going to get caught in there. And then we can put this on. This just snaps right in place pretty easily. Snap the outsides and then just kind of go around the edges. There we go. Just putting a little bit of pressure there, right there. All right, all those are on. So now we can put the 6+1 screws on the faceplate.
All right, those 7 are in place now. Not too tight, obviously, but you want to go ahead and just kind of give them just a little bit of a hand tightening. All this is working good, like it's supposed to. Yep, all is good. All right, so now we need to put this top piece back on, the RF board. All right, so remember I just put the heatsink over it. So what you would probably want to do if you're doing any kind of maintenance or anything on this is you want to clean all of this thermal compound off and put more thermal compound on. There's so much on this that I don't think that that's really necessary right now. But if I were doing this professionally, I would definitely clean this and put more thermal compound on each of these. In this case, we're just going to put it back together. All right, I'm going to put this MIPI cable in first, kind of opposite of what we did last time. But is this where, yeah, let's do this. Before we do that, these are the 2 screws, or all the screws that I missed last time. So let's go ahead and put the screws in the top of this. Okay, and as you can see, that's all of the plastic screws, or they're metal screws, but the screws made for plastic. So all we have left are the machine screws, which I have right over here. All right, now we can put the RF board back on. So I'm gonna do the ribbon cable first, because it is the most difficult. But this makes it easy. If you put it in upside down, or hold it upside down like this, make sure that the cable is sitting, kind of push it in at an angle and make sure it's hard to say exactly how to make sure it's sitting correctly. But if you look at this, the line between the brown and this white line right here, that's maybe 1 millimeter of a difference, 1.5 or so. But just make sure it's in there flat, and then it's pushed in all the way, and that's pushed in all the way. So don't think that that line has to be covered with the brown little connector flap. It doesn't. It's sticking out about 1 millimeter, 1.5 millimeters or so. All right, now that that's done, let's do the MIPI cable. In fact, I'm gonna put this tape over this first. There we go. Trying really carefully not to put my fingers in the blue goo. Now we can do this MIPI, which is not easy because the more I stretch and strain this ribbon cable, the worse, the more of a chance I have of it breaking. So I'm just going to try to get this in there just right. This MIPI cable, you have to make sure those black edges are lined up. Push in one side, then the other, then the middle. Make sure it's nice and flat, which this is, so we can put the tape on. All right, there we go. That was the hard part of this. All right, here's the other thing, real quick, before we screw this thing down in place. This ribbon cable comes basically folded up and pinched underneath this RF board. This is the other, I think, big design flaw to this, because this is carrying power, basically, a lot of it, and data from the RF board to the OLED boards down there, or to the LED board down there. And this thing all pinched up and folded up underneath this doesn't seem like the best thing, because the more you open this up and put it back together, it's just going to break these copper connectors on the inside of this cable, the copper wires. So luckily they will send you one of these cables to replace if you ask them to. So I know that for a fact. At least they did for me. So if you have issues, then it's, inspect this cable and make sure that this isn't broken at one of these bends. It's very likely can be. All right, so let's put this back in place. I'm just gonna put the bottom or rear side in first, and then with that being folded down, making sure none of these cables are getting held under. There we go. And this just kind of feels like I'm forcing it down because that ribbon cable is being pinched back there. All right, and then we're going to use a machine screw to do this top one. Just the top one for now. Machine screw, you don't have to do the trick of doing it lefty-loosey first until it clicks. Although with these thin threads, you may want to do that. But if this machine screw should be real easy to thread in. If it's hard at all, that means that it's cross-threaded. All right, that's done. At this point, we need to make our connections back. See this MIPI cable wire right here? This is okay the way this is, but if you really want to, you can kind of just tuck that in a little bit and just make sure you're not pinching it with your tweezers or anything. But it's nice and tight in there. And so now I'm going to put these UFL connectors back on. And this is not fun, putting these UFL connectors back on, because it's really, really easy to bend them. You just have to be very careful. I try to grab it with some tweezers on the back side and make it flat right on top of the connector. And then with a plastic piece or another pair of tweezers or something, as soon as it sits down on top, that's when I can give it the pressure and make it click in place, just like that. Same thing, they should only reach. However, if you do get one of them off, or if you do get these mixed up, it's really no big deal, because they're the same thing on the inside. All right, I'm gonna do this one, then this one. Just take your time doing this. Make sure it's exactly right before you start pressing down on it. You can very easily bend those pins on the inside of the connector of the board, or you can bend the ones on the cable, and that is not fun. All right, let's route these now. I'm gonna route them off of this big chip, even though they want to go right on top of it. We don't want that. I'm just gonna kind of route them right down the side. These are all going over here. And
And at this point is where you would want to put on your new heatsink, if that's what you're doing. But I'm not gonna do that with these goggles. I'm gonna put the original heatsink right back on. Man, it's crazy how much of a difference this thing is from this. Anyway, let's put, you can see this little notch right here. It helps line everything up. So just line the notch up. Oh, there's one thing we didn't do. I forgot. We've got to put the this antenna connector back on. Let's do that real quick. Right on the Wi-Fi board right here. This one I can hold in place better, so I can just line it up and put it down with my finger. All right, and then this cable route it to the corner like this. Straight up and to the corner. You'll see why in a second. All right, so now with the heatsink, I can put it over, I can line it up right there and put it over on this side, and you'll see how now this comes out the edge right there. That's where you want it. Again, I think this is not a great idea because this heatsink in particular is a very sharp edge and it can eat through that coax very, very easily. But, you know, it is what it is. All right, so let's put 1, 2, 3, 4 screws back into this heatsink to hold it down. Okay, now we should have 2 screws left, machine screws. Make sure those are the little bit shorter, tinier threads. And we can put the top plate back on. Or actually, we need to put the LED. We need to put this on first. These are also labeled. You've got an R. Mine looks a little different. This is not what yours should look like. Mine looks a little different. That's for a different day. But there'll be an R on the side. Just plug it in here. And it does have to go in a certain way, so just make sure you get it correct. That one. And then an L. All right, those are on. And then these have to be routed through this channel right here. Right kind of next to this nose piece. That's where these need to be routed. You could go ahead and put these on now. So the best way I've found to put these on is to put the bottom in first, like that. And then right here at this corner, you want to kind of squeeze that down and in like this and hold that down. Make sure your wire is routed where it's supposed to. Make sure it's not routed in that hole right there. It's one in this little slot. Make sure it's routed in a slot. You can just push down on this part. Now this is flat all the way across. Same thing over here. Put the bottom in first. Make sure the wire is routed in that slot. Pushed down and in on this corner. All right. And then it looks, just make sure this isn't going to be pinched. Yeah, there we go. All right, and that wire is right where it's supposed to be. So now I can just push down on that corner, and now it's flat all the way across here. There we go. And then the last thing is to make sure that this Wi-Fi antenna isn't pinched where this little piece of plastic connects to the goggles, that little clip right there. So it should just, if you just have it sitting behind it, it should be fine. So I put the back part in first, push towards you, and then you can just snap it down in place. And it should fit fairly easily. all these things just snap in very easily. There's not like any kind of real hard force for much of it. All right, and then the last things now are the 2 screws that we have left. Go right there. You should see it pull in. Yep, and make that seam very tight. All right, there we go. Put your face foam back on and your strap, and you are good to go. All right, thank you guys for watching, and hopefully you know, this helped teach you how to do this. If you have any issues, always look back at this video and you'll be able to see how it goes back together. Thanks.